So I recently got a request to do a model showcase on the Beast Lord that I recently finished. So what we're going to do here is we're just going to go through some slides of some pictures, take a look at steps, talk about what I did, the idea behind the thing, and that sort of stuff. So what you can see in front of you right here is basically where this whole thing started. This is the staircase from the Stardrake kit and some flames from an endless spell that I wasn't using. I had this idea of this flaming staircase and to have some kind of chaos hero walking down it. Just sort of as a concept, and I tried to replicate what I had in my head on into a miniature, and this is sort of what I came up with. So this is where it started. As you can see, I've already like green stuffed the gaps and whatnot, and begun painting. I wanted it to have this sort of green glow because the army I'm working on right now, that is the color of the base work on for the entire army, is a sort of green sickly glow because they're somewhere in the in-between between Shyish and Ulgu. If that place exists, I don't know, but that's the narrative behind my army. So there you go. Here's just what it looks like from the other side. Excuse me. What I really tried to do was emphasize this green glow and have that sort of hit everything. I wanted the scene to be at night so that I could really push that green throughout the entire miniature. And yeah. So here's the miniature that's going to be on the stairs. So this is kind of how my whole process starts to begin with. I'll have an idea. I'll try and find what bits I can that are close enough to what I'm looking for, and then I'll just kind of green stuff the gaps. If I can't find exactly what I'm looking for, I'll just sculpt it myself. It's something that I have a lot of practice with, so it's not something that's entirely difficult, but it is a lot harder than just finding the right bits. So like this is an amalgamation of a bunch of different stuff. Like he's got two swords sheathed on his back, which are from the Chaos Knight kit, the new one from the Start Collecting. His cloak and like the front of his armor and his arms are from the Lord on Karkadrak kit. The sword is actually two swords because I really liked the runes that were on the Lord on Karkadrak's Hellblade. Unfortunately, that sword to me was just too short. It was like a short sword, so what I ended up doing was cutting it at the hilt and then adding a Chaos Warrior sword to it and then kind of shaving it down so that the blade matched in width, because the blade for the Lord on Karkadrak, the actual blade itself is very thin, and a lot of the new Chaos Warrior blades are actually quite a bit thicker. The actual like werewolf that's in there, that is from Mercia Miniatures. So what I did basically was I built the cloak and everything, and then cut the bits that I wanted from the werewolf, attached them to the cloak, and then I green stuffed all the gaps, filled in with fur, sculpted a tabard and a belt and all that stuff, filled all the gaps, and just sort of made it all fit together and look like a cohesive piece. Here's what it looks like from the back. This cloak is actually 3 separate cloaks, so it's two cloaks from the Chaos Warriors from the Start Collecting kit, and the Lord on Karkadrak as well. So a lot of the time, like I'll try and keep 2 projects going at once. In this case, the base was like its own separate miniature, where I spent a lot of time trying to get the highlights in the right spot and that kind of thing. And I would basically just return to this whenever I got sick of sculpting or I was waiting for green stuff to dry. So basically, I did a lot of back and forth here. A lot of the white is being blown out by the lighting in my studio here, but this is where the base is, and this is basically like almost finished. There's some more glaze work and stuff to be done, but I have to wait for the green stuff on the werewolf that's going to be on these stairs itself to be finished being cured, and then I have to paint basically the entire miniature because of the way it's going to be standing on here. He's sort of hunched over, and a lot of the areas would be very difficult to get to having him attached. So this is after the like most of the sculpting work is done. There's still a little bit of gap filling to do, like around his hand and stuff like that. But yeah, this is basically the end product. So you can see like a lot of the fur that's been added around his head just to sort of bulk that up. This was a real challenge. Sculpting the fur for the werewolf itself here because I had to make sure that it distinctly looked different from the cloak of the Lord on Carcadrak. Um, One way you can do this is by painting it a different color, which I also did, but you want those two textures to look quite different, and in this case, it's the difference between wolf fur and bear fur, which is, if you actually look at the two textures side by side, wolves have a lot more of a poofy look than bears do. Bears' fur is typically very sort of straight and flat, whereas wolves are more poofy and have a thicker undercoat than a bear does. So that was the idea behind that, to keep those two textures very different. I also had to sculpt ears on him, which is always a pain, but hey, this is the life we live. So here's after I started painting him. I very much wanted this to be lit from underneath, where the flame was sort of illuminating the bulk of his body and part of his face, and I wanted moonlight to be shining down from over top. So what I did was I ended up basing this guy out in a gray and then coming back with a very dark blue, doing the areas that were going to be completely in shadow in that dark blue. And then I just started highlighting up the wolf's fur and bits and pieces of his armor and the fabric and stuff like that in with this pale green color from the flames. I wanted him to have white fur so that the green would be more pronounced, because I knew if I did it in black, it wouldn't have as good of an effect, and if I did brown, then it would just look muddy. So I figured white fur for a wolf. It also made it more simple for me. Like, this was my first real attempt at like really trying to do an OSL effect on a miniature, where it was like, I'm actually gonna try hard on this. I've done this kind of thing before, but it's always been like something small where it's like an orb or something like this. Never anything on this scale where it's like the entire miniature is bathed in some kind of otherworldly light. So yeah, so basically what I wanted to do was come in here and block out where these colors were going to be and then refine it more afterwards. So this is more or less basically doing the same thing. This was a very difficult thing to do. The cloak itself, when you mix this green color with the color that I was using for the cloak, which was like a red leather, it turns like an almost fleshy tone, so it becomes very, very difficult to sort of highlight and keep looking like a red cloak. It's a beautiful color, but it's just very hard to add that sickly green flame glow to it. So this was a lot of back and forth, just kind of trying to make this work and look a certain way. Um, I also trying to further differentiate the fur of the miniature. I decided to make the fur on the cloak black. Um, and this also helped with the lighting effect because I could warm highlight the front of it with this warm yellowy green, and then cold highlight it from the back with sort of a gray blue. Um, Adding this green into basically every color that I used in order to highlight this up, and using other techniques other than just layering, like stippling and that. There's a bit of that that can be seen on the cloak and on his tabard and on the belt. And it's a lot of going back and forth trying to make the lighting and everything work, and trying to make sure that the sculpting work that I did is well defined. Like, before you even put paint onto the miniature, it's something that you have to be mindful of before you put paint to model. So here's another picture after I started. Um, I don't want to say finished, but like my initial pass for the lighting from the flame is finished before it's like refined. So I started on the other side where I was adding in the sort of moonlight colors and that kind of stuff, darkening up the recesses and trying to make it look like a scene at night. So eventually you get to a point where you have to tack this miniature onto its base to continue on. So this is the right after I initially attached him to his base. Yeah, and just trying to make sure that the lighting looked correct and that the highlights were in the right spots and that kind of thing. Here's what he's looking like from the back right now. I'm trying to take some lessons from Darren Latham and from Vince, where instead of just adding layers and trying to use that to blend, where you're actually adding texture to the miniature by using stippling to sort of get that kind of fabric texture, and again trying to keep my highlights on the fur and that's around his shoulders very, very light, because I really want to emphasize that the fur is black. I had a lot of trouble with the metallics on this miniature as well, just because of the different colored tones and light and everything that were in this miniature, and the way things are meant to reflect. Like this, there was a lot of thought that had to go into how this thing was painted, and some of it was successful, some of it wasn't. Yeah, we'll just kind of leave that at that. So here's what the miniature looks like from the front. I wanted this thing to have a really cool looking silhouette where it was almost an oval, like you can see, like from tip of cloak to tip of sword, and then back down to where it follows the flame, and so that your focal point is right here on his face. And I sort of wanted to frame that. It was very difficult to try and make that happen though, like, because down here is so bright, and these edges of the cloak right here would be where the highest highlight would be for where the moonlight was hitting, and obviously there'd be moonlight hitting along the edge of the sword here, which would also be super bright. But I very much wanted the focal point to be on his face here, and after, like, this miniature is obviously finished, but after like sitting and looking through these pictures and looking at the miniature for extended periods of time, I really wish that I would have sort of cut him at this point here and sort of angled him up more so that he wasn't so hunched over, but live and learn. And the end result is this. So we ended off with what I think is an okay looking miniature. The highlights and everything where the moonlight's supposed to be hitting, coming down from this angle here, hitting his face, going along the edge of the sword, the light coming from the fire here being hitting his knee because there's actually like a big gap in the stairs there. And obviously the light coming up here and hitting his face. I'm actually really happy with how his sword came out. He's got these great yellow runes in here. That was another way of bringing the sort of luminosity from the flame over to another section of the miniature. That's about the only metallic on here on this entire miniature that I'm happy with. Like, there's not a huge amount, but like his gauntlets, and he's got these chest plates here and up here on the hilts of the sword. But the sword itself definitely came out better than the rest of it. Just the angles, I had a really hard time with this angular sort of plate over his forearm, because the moonlight would be hitting from here, the fire would be hitting from here. It was just, it also had this like rune etched into it, so it's very like lighting wise, it was a very complicated piece to try and get to look right, and at certain angles it just doesn't. So yeah. So here's just a close-up of his face. It's, his eyes are actually like a yellow color. You can't see them here for some reason. I don't know why. It's just really weird. I guess they're like up more, but of course. Yeah, so it was just a matter of trying to get the lighting and everything working the way that it should, and making sure that it was consistent. And here's a picture from the top down. You can see, like, I'm so happy with how the sword came out. The cloak, the texturing, the cloak, the small fine highlights on the fur. I wish that I had maybe gone like a higher level of like a blue-gray in here, just to sort of emphasize the fact that this thing's got white fur. But again, it's something that can be revisited later. So that's basically it. This is the last photo in the slide. Let me know what you guys think. This is just a miniature showcase. If this is something you guys would be interested in seeing more of, where I explain my process, that type of deal, let me know in the comments below. And yeah, I want to do a quick shout out to Mr. Mephisto. Thank you for lighting a fire under my ass and getting me to make a video. Yeah, so I want to thank you all for watching, and I will catch you guys on the next one.